Hello everyone, I'm Brian. Welcome back. Let's go and get started.
Imposing their spirituality on others. He was afraid of coercion. But it's a very interesting thing to see. But I want now to move to the real nub of the issue. If Bull had done all these things, and many of these ideas came from within the Western tradition, the most recent was the trendiness of theosophy, even if it was alternative. Why then did she turn to Vivekananda? That is the nub of the question. Why did these Western women turn to him? And it's here that Guru Bhakti comes into focus. We cannot ignore the human element, what Vivekananda did for them and vice versa. It would take a whole other paper to explain how these American women reacted to a manly man, such as Vivekananda, who had a formidable intellect, but who nonetheless mothered them. He was unusual. He was rare. He would sit on the floor and grind spices, as he did in California. He cooked for them. They'd never been cooked for by a man in their whole lives. I hope that's not the case for any of the women in the audience today. And he made rock candy to explain the meaning of bhakti's sweet purity. He was as far from the stereotype of an Indian sadhu as he was from the puritanical New England preacher of their experience. Vivekananda taught and listened, but also engaged in unaccustomed ways. For example, he worked to heal Bull's rift with her daughter and gave her a path and purpose. And the letters about the daughter are really very sad. You know, he really did try. He named her Saint Sarah, a fount of discernment and practicality, and not dissimilar in these gifts, at least, to the great saintliness of Sharada Devi. So it was on the other side, the western side. She was Saint Sarah on the other side. The wife, and of course, Sharada was the wife and consort of Ramakrishna, already now widely regarded in India as a goddess. He opened spiritual possibilities, but offered a kind of love that Sarah and the other woman admitted that they had never experienced. The following year, he went not to Greenacre, but to Thousand Island in upstate New York with a group of potential followers. How many of you have been to Thousand Island? It's very, very beautiful. It's rare. And I went, and I was astonished. Once again, it's very Methodist. It's a Methodist settlement in nature, very important. He felt very comfortable there. I think it recalled his wanderings in many ways. Once again, they spoke of him as someone who was captivating and remarked on the magic of his presence, the tenor of his voice, the turn of his head, the expression in his eyes. They focused on his hair and beauty. When he went later to California and roomed in Pasadena with a group of single women, they listened at the door as he sang his morning prayers in Sanskrit. And they said they didn't understand a word, but they got the sense of it. Alice Hanbro said very honestly, even 40 years later, I can only describe myself as enchanted by him. It's magical, okay? Now, Indian devotees made very similar remarks about him, of course stripped of the Orientalism, but could more easily encompass their response as a religious emotion. This is the difference. The women don't, it's overwhelming. And also, they have the concept of darshan, the propitious view of a holy person or deity. They know this emotion is religious and comprehended something of it from their culture, even if it was very important. I mean, when we read Vivekananda's relationship to Ramakrishna, we understand, he understood that there was something remarkable happening, but even for him it was overwhelming. But for American women, especially of Protestant heritage, it was a form of, quote, personal love or enchantment, a word, as I said, that conjured up a kind of magic. Indeed, such emotions in Western anti-clerical critiques of the power of Catholic priests over women in the confessional tried to make this something ugly. And it became a trope in literature, especially popular in Georges du Maurier's 1894 work Trilby, in which the hypnotist Svengali manipulates the heroine. And we know this is still the ugly stereotype of the Indian guru who can seduce and misbehave amongst Western women, okay? But this was not Vivekananda. The women could not easily separate the personal and the impersonal. Vivekananda was aware of the difficulty and spoke long and often about the problems of allowing such personal love to overwhelm the process of spiritual transformation. In one of the lessons at Thousand Island, he explained how it was supposed to work. The real guru, he said, is the channel through which the spiritual current flows to us, the link which joins us to the whole spiritual world. Too much faith in personality produces weakness and idolatry. But intense love for the guru makes rapid growth possible. He connects us with the internal guru. Adore your guru if there be real truth in him. That guru bhakti will quickly lead you to the highest.
Guru bhakti. Is that a saying that's normally said? That is guru. I still assume a teacher, but I think Sadhguru says it's more of a seeker, and bhakti being devotion or love. Guru love, guru devotion, teacher love, teacher devotion. It's very strange. I've never heard those phrases said other than from her. Guru bhakti. It's two different words that don't mix. But is this something that's common? I just never heard it. Let me know.
So that's it. That is a few lines. It sums it up. Vivekananda was their guide, teacher, friend, and bitter critic, all parts of the guru tradition, but a mixture unknown in America. However, he steered clear of any hint of the ego-annihilating ecstasies of Ramakrishna. He worried that that kind of mysticism might be perceived as little more than madness, that like, quote, heathen idol-worshipping, such tales could only alienate them. He was later reported as saying in one of the reminiscences, "If I had spoken of these acts to them, they would have thrown me and my guru into the nearest ditch." So there were areas of constraint. I'm not idealizing. There were definitely areas of constraint. Even when he insisted on obedience as the first step to liberation, what he regarded as the annihilation of the ego, this surrender was accompanied by encouraging his followers to question everything and to feel their own power. For them, this was unaccustomed freedom, but he was also ready to devise unpleasant strategies to shift their preconceptions. Christine Greenstidel, Sister Christine, for example, remember how he blew cigarette smoke in her face to rid her of, quote, chivalric notions and to show that what she saw as reverence for women was nothing more than a gilded cage. Chivalry, he believed, was little more than sex. And I think this is, again, really powerful. He didn't want her to feel that he needed to give her an arm to climb up rocks and, At first appalled, she soon realized that his desire that she stand on her own 2 feet, that's her own words, meant that she was to acquire a form of robustness, which in India Vivekananda would praise as virility, and Margaret Noble or Sister Nivedita as aggressive Hinduism. That is not his term, that's hers, as far as I could tell. I worked and worked to see if he'd ever said that. So it's very important to see who says what when. Noble, later renamed as Nivedita, wished to grow but realized that the idea of Guru Bhakti was paradoxical, requiring a kind of submission that almost destroyed her sense of self. The worst was when he scolded, as he did frequently, a torment that his female disciples from the West always found really difficult, unlike the monks in India who accepted the scolding and knew it was part of learning detachment. But this is a very different context. Nonetheless, his approach was effective. At Thousand Island, Christine felt freer than ever before. She wrote, "It is not difficult if one's devotion to the Guru was great enough, for then, like the snake, one dropped the old and put on the new." And he really loved her, and she had a very difficult life, and he really saved her, really. Sister Nivedita, a British woman of Scotch-Irish descent, a much more complicated character, went to India in 1898 and ultimately became a radical nationalist, described almost breathlessly the intensity of the rapport. And there they are together on the pilgrimage to Amarnath, where they have an extraordinary experience in the high mountains in the Himalayas. Not long after she arrived, she went on pilgrimage with him to the caves of Amarnath, where Shiva's ice lingam is accessible in the summer. She felt cast aside by his spiritual self-absorption and later castigated herself for not being able to contain the personal longings she felt for him. Nor did he allow her in the early days of her training the freedom and play that Ramakrishna had allowed him, and which he had allowed his disciples of Greenacre. But what's so moving about this story was that she would cry. And Josephine and Sarah Bull were there. These are her friends. And they said to him, "You are being too harsh with her." And he stopped. He stopped. And then he tried something different. And it worked. She later wrote that those days in the mountains, she finally understood. It's really interesting. It takes her 2 years for her to assess what happened there. And she wrote, again, I think very movingly, "I think perhaps the whole of one's nature comes out in that relationship, the bad as well as the good, and no one else matters very much. Probably this is always so with a guru. I am willing to admit, after all, that one's love for Swami is sadly, quote, personal. If you will also let me claim that it is at the same time, in some ways, the most impersonal thing of which one is capable." And that is, again, that attempt to bring together these opposites, the personal and the impersonal. It's, of course, I don't understand it, but I am very moved by these descriptions. The words capture a larger insight reflected in developing ideas of what was at the time called the unconscious. It was just emerging, the one that we know today, that went to the heart of psychoanalytic visions of transference and countertransference. I would argue that Vivekananda's appeal in the West was grounded in these understandings and emerged alongside a remarkable body of other work focusing on the nature of the self. We must remember that the first English language manual on yoga was Vivekananda's, and it appeared in 1896. It was ready in 1894, and of course it was at Greenacre that he basically came up with how to write it. And it was pervaded by the psychological terminology that William James was beginning to make famous. But the influence went in the other direction as well, with James using the same metaphors that he had derived from Ramakrishna to explain mystical experience as oceanic, in which the soul feels a boundless kinship to the absolute. And it's very interesting, years later, Romain Rolland would try to convince Freud of this oceanic sensation. But as we know, Freud was very interested in the Oedipal conflict. He didn't understand the pre-articulate, the oceanic, which of course Ramakrishna did understand through his connection to Kalima. And but nonetheless, I don't think that correspondence left Freud untouched. I would argue that it was still very important. But it is that the nature of the maternal that Ramakrishna, I think, in many ways embodied, that makes this tradition so remarkable and in constant debate with some of these other global intellectual developments. Both the similarities and differences are hard to avoid because all appeared almost simultaneously. Raja Yoga was 1896, Freud's Studies in Hysteria was 1895, William James' Varieties of Religious Experience was 1902, literally within 6 years. James was important because he knew Vivekananda, and all the people that were important to his in that Boston area also knew James. And they were very educated in the so-called New Psychology. James was interested not only in the mystic's experience of connection with the divine, but also concerned with every aspect of possible mental healing, both as investigator and as subject. I don't know if you know, but James suffered through a terrible crisis. He had suicidal, what he called suicidal neurasthenia. So he also engaged in discussion with Vivekananda and worried over similar issues, as his private correspondence reveals, and that is, as I say in the book. Although the three men held very different views of religion and mystical experience, they all worked in this context that thought about what happens between people, rapport, connection, mentor, disciple, And I think that's how we can understand it better. But at the same time, I'd like to say that it was also very, very different. Freud, of course, ultimately hid himself away behind the couch. He refused darshan because he thought it would compromise him and take the patient away from his or her own fantasies. What's so interesting is that Vivekananda was not worried about that. He was also not worried. He never took money for his, whereas Freud tried to keep control of the process through keeping it to the 50-minute hour, with the contract of the self being engaged in a 50-minute process. That is not what Vivekananda was doing. What I think is so interesting about these men is that they all paid attention to women in their distinctive ways, even though they're often accused of not doing so in the way we would like it. It's interesting, isn't it? But Vivekananda was remarkable because of the Indian context from which he came, and where such connections might have been prescribed. But it was an experiment. One of the things about Vivekananda's relationships in the West was they were extraordinarily experimental. And some worked and some didn't. But he was very courageous in undertaking them and also very disciplined when he did so. But the differences among these therapies was as important as the similarities. As I said, in psychoanalysis, the visual was dangerous. Freud instead emphasized the process of confiding, free associating, and fantasizing to catalyze the transference that forced therapeutic regression. And as I said, it was contracted. Psychoanalysis did not offer transformation, but only an ordinary unhappiness. That was the word that Freud used. So he didn't. He was, quote, rationalist, and he thought religion was an illusion. But what I wonder is whether that illusion comes from his learning something about Maya. I have yet to investigate it. In contrast, Vivekananda refused all payment, resisted Western liberal notions of the contracting self, didn't hide himself away. Equally, he scolded and disciplined in ways that would get a psychoanalyst struck off. Having experienced the heady spiritual passion of Guru Bhakti with Ramakrishna, Vivekananda revered its capacity to transform. Rather than regulated professional treatment, the relationship worked because the Guru became more than family, allowing a protected place for emotional release and psychological creativity. And of course, a chance for spiritual realization. That was the great difference.
I do wonder what Swami Vivekananda has done in that. Like, so she explained that some things worked, some things didn't. I'm wondering, like, what did he do? Like specifics, and more along the lines of stories of his success and failures and however he helped these people. Because I'm just curious, it's like, okay, why did it work, or how did it work? So you get an understanding of, obviously of why it did or didn't. It could be the exact same process for one person and it worked, but yet for a different person it didn't. Of course, everyone's a little bit different. But another thing I wanted to make note of, she said a while back, is the fact that he did go to California apparently, and I think in New York and Chicago. So he has been around, but has he been to the South though? Just because I think South tends to be the poorer parts of the states. Now there are still rich people there in the South, but they just tend to be more poor. I don't know about the middle of the United States. I know the coast tends to be the richer because obviously America was founded on the eastern side and then expanded west, and then had the gold rush, I think, in California, and then you also had the Asian trades and stuff going on the west side. So you had European trades on the east and the Asian trades on the west, and South was kind of cotton pretty much. But yes, anyways, and and at least as far as the little amount of history I know about America, even though I did take history class out of America, it's just generally the South tends to be a bit poor, just because it's not really industrialized. It was farming cotton in particular. And I'm curious, has he been to the middle, like, the middle of the United States, like where there's just massive farmlands, or to the South, where there's generally the poor?
Vivekananda revealed a remarkable intuitive sense when he transposed Guru Bhakti into a different American idiom. In adapting Ramakrishna's teaching on universalism, he strove to speak, quote, in their language, and saw how their Protestant self-divinizing traditions and mind cure practices might be poured into an Advaitic vessel. But as an Indian guru, he also realized how important an engaged and attentive human presence was.
I will say that's exactly what I'm trying to do. There's a reason why I had those three things. The materialistic world, Advaita Vedanta, and there's mind. It's somewhere in the middle. I understand some portion of Advaita Vedanta. I understand some portion of the material world. And then I'm trying to find this happy median. It's like a step up from the material world, but a step down from Advaita Vedanta. But it's a happy medium. It's a way to get into it. And at least for me, is trying to think of ways that are practical that I can tell people that will help them suffer less. But it's kind of difficult, especially when you start talking about the Atman and Maya and how you're not the mind. That could potentially detract the conversation, just because it's like, oh, you're crazy talking. And Swami Vivekananda understood that. He was trying to find that language as he talks to people, and that's exactly what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to find that language as well. Not great, but trying to find it.
To the process of achieving self-realization. Vivekananda's Hindu universalism thus had an abiding impact on American spiritual culture and on the global history of ideas that has yet to be fully appreciated. And that's something I really wanted to say, which is, if we have all these things in the, quote, West, then why is it that the Indians have not been in the picture? And of course, I hope now Vivekananda will be. Thank you very much indeed.
I thought it was going to be like, oh, maybe she's going to answer questions, maybe.
My name is Cordelia, and I'm a physician. I just was interested in your comparison of Swami Vivekananda's as a teacher and comparing it to Freud.
Very different.
Absolutely. Their purpose was itself very different, right?
Absolutely.
So I just didn't understand how you looked at both of their works.
Okay, well, what I was trying to say is that both of them were very interested in the connection between people and how that could transform. But Freud only wanted ordinary unhappiness, whereas Vivekananda was trying to teach techniques for self-realization that would bring them to spiritual transcendence.
Correct.
Yeah, and that's completely different. But nonetheless, when he was speaking to them, he understood that, this picture I was trying to show you of this. This is, and you're a physician, bedside manner and connection is also important in what all that you do. But that was their vision, that there needed to be some kind of connection of this kind. But he pushes them further. And I think one of the most ways in which he pushes them is through meditation. Though it's very interesting. Sarah Bull does a lot of meditation. I'm never sure how much Sister Nivedita did. She says she's accustomed to it. In India, it's quite natural. But I know that she continued to do a lot of prayer. But what I'm saying is, he constantly said, this is how you can make the transformation. I am here. I am beside you. And the thing about Freud was saying also, I am beside you. I am the listening subject. Even though you can't see me, I am there. And in this context, you can free associate, you can do this, you can do that. Certainly, that was certainly true of these women who were with Vivekananda. He allowed them free play. He allowed them to say whatever, but he also had other things in mind. And also, he was both harsh on their foibles and then often really gentle, you know? So it's that mixture. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
So that's what I'm trying to get at, yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. Professor, I'm Swami Sarvapriyananda.
Yes, I know.
And ever since I first heard you speak about this book at Harvard a couple of years back, when I talk about your project and about you, people ask me this question: did you ever ask her how did she come across Vivekananda, and how did she become interested, and how did she come to write this book?
That's right. Now I can tell you. I mean, this is a very important thing for me because, as you can imagine, you know, academics value specialization and expertise, and I was, you know, a very, very well-known historian of France, and, well, not very well-known, but, you know, in the field, doing the things. And then I read the correspondence between Romain Rolland and Gandhi. And it was in reading that there was a woman in between, Madeleine Slade,
Yes.
Miraben.
Miraben.
And I became fascinated with what was going on. She became a gift that Rolland gave to Gandhi. It was from the west to the east. Now, Rolland had a very big ego. He would say things like, I started to read his relationship to Tagore. And of course, he would write and say, we are two sides of the universal brain. Again, you know, they have low opinion of themselves. and he would say, I'm, you know, the rational and you're the spiritual. To call Tagore just spiritual is to completely miss the boat. But what was interesting to me was, how did they do this? How did they think of them, present themselves in these essential categories? And then Rolland had a fantasy that Gandhi would come to the West and end fascism. I mean, it was a complete fantasy. Gandhi did come to visit him, and Gandhi said, this is your engagement. It's not mine. He had other engagements. And also, you know, Gandhi thought that fascism after imperialism was inherent in the violence of Western society, you know? So for him it wasn't as surprising as it was to Rolland. But it was then that I started reading the books on Ramakrishna, his books on Ramakrishna and Vivekananda. And in the book on Vivekananda, he's this very, you know, pompous French intellectual. He writes with respect about William James. He finds it fascinating. Josephine gives him all the materials. Josephine MacLeod, one of the great friends of Vivekananda, he makes fun of her. He calls her a dilettante. He has no idea about her capacity. You know, it's very interesting. And yet, he's completely transformed by reading these books. And he really believes that without the East, the West will decay. He doesn't think that the West should give up its own mysticism. He wants to return to Christian mysticism, but this idea of the inherent mysticism or spiritual knowledge of the East. And then I started reading Vivekananda's letters. And I don't know, many of you have read them. And there's just something about the dryness of the wit combined with the humanity and the vulnerability. There was something about the fact that he was so ill. And I was interested in how a man like this could retain a centeredness in the midst of traveling from India, being culturally ambidextrous, perfect English, constantly dropping epigrams from Shakespeare, knows the Bible as well as anybody that he's meeting, and intoning songs with Ramakrishna of bhakti and Kalidasa and all that. And how do you do that and yet at the same time be open to what's going on around you in this new world. And that was the thing that fascinated me. And also, the women too fascinated me because...
Well, before, how does he do that? He is a very, very wise person. When you go to another country, you don't impose your ways or views. You go there, observe the people. There's a famous saying, when in Rome, act Rome? Something like that, when in Rome, be Roman, or something like that. Basically meaning that you blend in with the people, that way you don't stand out. Although Swami Vivekananda did not blend in terms of the outfit, but, it's fine. But in terms of the culture, it's where he tried to blend in, I think, for the most part. Obviously, he understood that the other religion there, he didn't like it, but he wasn't trying to force people out of it, if I remember correctly, which I don't think he never really does. He doesn't want coercion, so that's the reason why I don't think he forced people. Very much my thinking too. I don't like to do that as well. Again, something about Swami Vivekananda. Anyways, but yeah, he was very wise. Again, there are stupid people out there who goes to another country and enforce their views, and they think that they run the world. Typically, they're stereotypically American, though. But yes, very wise. Learn the ways, understand the culture, and then understand the language. So you know how to speak to them and speak what you know to them in a language they understand. Again, that's something that I'm trying to do when I watch these videos as well, is trying to interpret this in such a way. But again, there could be always a loss in translation. But it's the best way I understand it, and it's the best way I can translate it. I can't stop suffering in the world. I can only try to share my wisdom to the people that I know, and hopefully that it helps. Much like how Swami Vivekananda, when he tried, it failed sometimes and it succeeded sometimes. That's just the way it's going to be.
They're genteel spiritual seekers, most of them. They're upper class, most of them.
There you go.
And yet...
That's what I was talking about. These are rich people and women that are in the rich family. The men tend to be working a lot because they're the ones running the business, tend to be, but some of them have free time. And the women, they tend to just be in the house with maids. And if they have kids, I don't know. I'm not very famous, not very well known of those times, but obviously women that couldn't really work. I think the poor does, though. The poor women tend to work like housemaids, but the rich women didn't really have jobs. Now, there are some women who did take some jobs from, from the husband sometimes, or represented their husband sometimes, and even did business with their husbands. I guess they're kind of like the envoy or something. I don't know what the right word for it is. Like they send their wives out to be their speaker, their voice, whenever the husbands are busy. So, but typically though, that's why I wonder if he ever visited the poor side to see how the men and women acted, because I think that's a bit more telling. I'm curious as to his thoughts on the poor Americans of that time, at the very least. I wonder if the story would have been different. Again, she spoke very clearly of, what the men were like. They're very logical, and the women were very much more open. But I can kind of get it, because again, I assume at those times men were quite busy, didn't believe in none of this Eastern philosophy stuff. It's all nonsense. If it's not making them money, it's not part of their business. But yeah. And then she did explain that he went to the West and didn't really speak much of that. So I think most of the stories coming from Chicago, New York area, I think, and with the upper class.
They're really looking for something outside the norm of American Protestant culture. And so in their way, they're also very brave. So that's how I got interested. And then I got hooked. And then the problem is, of course, in Oxford, which is very different from here, there's many, many Indians in Oxford and in Britain in general. And again, I just couldn't understand. I felt so ashamed. They all had, in Oxford, they all knew Darwin, Freud, Marx, and I had never even heard of Vivekananda. How does that happen? And that brought me back to Vivekananda's critique about imperialism and colonialism and missionary culture, and I began to think about his erasure. And it's not that he's erased, but it's a fugitive precedence, you know? And that's how I got interested. Okay. So it's a very long story, and I'm sorry to bore you with it. Yeah, but it's also fascinating. It's again, a personal journey, isn't it? Yeah.
Is it that? I mean, I definitely got to look up imperialism. I don't know the exact definition of it, but I think it's just when he's in the West tends to learn about the West. There's a lot of history in just the West alone. I'm sure in the East, there's a lot of history in the East as well. There's not enough time to learn. Even America, as young as it is, there's a lot of history there to know about every single history. You could probably learn American history pretty quickly. But these older countries in Europe and Asia, dude, there's not enough time to learn everything. So obviously the West will focus on the West, and I think the East will focus on the East. But I will say it's quite remarkable if in fact in the East they do talk about some Western things, which is not too uncommon. It shouldn't be uncommon, I don't think. Even in the West, we do learn about some history of the East. Hold on, let me think about that one. World War II. That's about the only history of the East, I suppose. But again, you know, unless there's been more classes of the world religion and world history, and but the thing is, so I think world history tends to focus more on Western stuff too. So I don't know. Let me know in Asia, did he just learn mostly about the East, or did he? I'm sure because the West has quite the influence on the East. There's quite high potentiality of Western history. I have a feeling it's just going to be tied towards what Western was involved in the Eastern area. But outside of that, so for example, like, did you learn anything about American history? Because American didn't really expand out too much. Let me know. In history class in the East, if you're in the East, did you learn anything about American history? Outside of World War II, World War I think that's it, in Vietnam. Yes, outside of those, did you learn anything about the West? If yes, anything about American history? If you have, that I will say yes. I mean, of course, if that's not something to choose, just let me know. I'm curious. Don't think at least as far as when I went to school, there wasn't really Eastern history. It's mostly learning about the West. It's understandable. College, I don't know if there's a course in Eastern history. I'm sure there might be now, but at least when I was going, it wasn't my interest. Computer science was my interest, so history, I said screw history. Anyways, continue.
Yes. Yes. There's two here. One, I think he was first, and then this lady here.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, you were first, I think. Oh. Yeah. Sorry. Oh, there's three questions. Good, good.
You know what? Actually, I'll pause it right here because we'll stop at this question here at 54:30. So yeah. Again, I'm just genuinely curious about all this stuff. Like, cause again, there's no way you can learn about all, like, especially Asian countries and Western Europeans has a very long history. Africa, Egypt does. I don't know much about anything else. Again, especially outside of Egypt, honestly. Strangely. Again, history is very heavy. Video over with, by the way. So history is very much very, very long, obviously. If you learn anything outside of that, is it by choice or was it required? But yeah, let me know again about my questions before, and also about the bhakti, guru bhakti. Is that really a phrase that's said? That makes no sense in my brain. Bhakti being a yoga, or you could say it being devotion or love. But guru meaning teacher in my mind, or seeker according to Sadhguru, I believe. Seeker of devotion, maybe? Seeker of love? Teacher of devotion, or teacher of love. Okay, but it just doesn't make sense in my mind. I would say the bhakti more of a path of love or devotion, not guru and bhakti. There's a guru, a teacher, that teaches bhakti, the path of bhakti. Yes, perhaps, but not guru bhakti. Again, let me know if is that really something that's said. It just doesn't make sense in my mind. Anyways, that's part 2. Next one will be the last one. If you like my content, please consider subscribing, thumbs up, thumbs down below. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next vid.